A comic is made up of multiple elements that come together to form a story. The difference between a good comic and a bad comic, other than personal taste, is how well you're able to harmonize between the story and the visuals. As the artist, you have a lot of choices that you can make and an infinite number of combinations to persuade the audience to stay a while and listen. Scott McCloud breaks these choices into 5 basic types: the choice of moment, the choice of frame, the choice of image, the choice of word, and the choice of flow. Now, I'm going to break down each of these choices, but before I do, please break down the subscribe button. Yeah, that works. So let's start with the first choice. The choice of moment is often in the rough, ugly stage of the comic. This is where you look at the scene from your story and you break it down into small chunks. In this scene of my comic The Ripple Effect, we have a character going to the gym, something happens to him, and then we end up in the hospital. Spoiler alert. We have a few objectives to achieve for this very first page. We need to introduce the reader to our character, we need to show them what that character is doing, and we need to show them where they are doing it. Now, these aren't our only objectives, but they're the main ones. So how many panels do we need? Well, you could probably achieve this in 1 or 2 panels if you want. You could have one panel just with a character in a gym. That achieves both of the main objectives. It shows the character and it shows the location. But you might want to inject a bit more pace into your panels, and so you may want to do it in more than 1. In my case, I chose 5, which might be excessive to some, and it might be too few for others. So for me, the first panel is the establishing shot, where we show the location, which is a gym. We then focus on our character as he gets ready to work out, and we show the reader what he's using to work out with. And we put all those elements together for our final panel, which shows everything come together. Now, when choosing which moments to keep and which moments to lose, you always have to put in mind how it serves the story. You want to keep the reader on board without confusing them, but you also don't want to flood the page with unnecessary panels that can be a bit too distracting and can slow the story down. It's all about balance, and it's not just about the choices that you make regarding the individual panels, but how one panel transitions to another. For our example, we went for action to action, which was walking to the gym, getting changed, and then working out. I'll have another video talking about panel transitions in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Now, the choice of frame is how you intend to compose your panel. How much of it will you render? Whereabouts will you crop? Is the point of view really close or really far? Are we looking up at something or down on something? As you can see, there are a lot of choices that can be made. In my example, for the first page, the camera position changes quite a lot. This is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because it helps make an otherwise mundane set of actions seem a bit more visually appealing, but being too liberal with the various camera movements can backfire because it can confuse the reader. If you've ever seen the Jason Bourne films and you see the fight scenes in those, you'll know what I'm talking about. Too many camera cuts can disorient the audience and they don't really know what's going on. But whichever angle you choose will be based on the feeling that you want to achieve. An extreme angle where we're looking up at something can really help sell the scale or size of an object. Likewise, if you want to look down and out across a scene, then that can provide quite a lot of information and is very useful for things like establishing shots. Now, speaking of establishing shots, these are often the very first panel on the page, and this tells the reader where the scene is taking place. And our example fits that as we see a man walking towards a gym. Now, establishing shots don't have to be at the beginning. You can put them at the end of the page, which can help build up suspense. Maybe the character's waking up and they don't know where they are. Generally speaking, your establishing shots will require the most work because they have the most information in them. And this is especially true if your setting or environment plays a major role in the story. For example, if it's important in your story that a setting is placed in New York or London or wherever, then you'll need to put in the appropriate amount of information to make that clear. This is an interesting one. You might assume that choice of image is pretty obvious, especially when you're working from a script, but it's not necessarily going to be a literal translation of the script. A lot of writers won't necessarily think as visually as you will. And also, if you're writing yourself, then you may find that your choice of image changes from when you wrote it to when you start drawing it. Now, the script I was working on had the stage directions of a man walks into a gym when ... Now, I co-wrote the script, so I had the luxury of being quite intimate with the character, so it helped inform my decisions and choices when it came to the images. But let's move on to the following page for this one. The first image focuses on the character on the treadmill, not the guy lifting weights as in the previous page. So we know the scene is following him. We can see he is working hard. We can see he is turning off the machine, as it's the same button as he pressed before he started working out. We can see he's sweating, so he rubs his face. We also have the dramatic irony where he has a nosebleed before he himself realizes. As he realizes this, he begins to feel a bit dazed and confused. We see that through the choice of words, but also the choice of the color palette. The saturation begins to fade as he does. Now, those specific images were not written down in the descriptions. That's just what I came up with to help sell the idea that he's in a bit of trouble here. And none of this has to do with style or drawing ability. It's simply how you're choosing to use imagery to help communicate with the reader. You could do a super realistic, amazingly rendered image on every single panel, but if they're not communicating the story to the reader, then they're just a set of pretty illustrations. Image has to serve the story. Now, likewise with choice of image, the choice of word might seem pretty obvious because you're working from a script. And in some cases, you may be locked in very rigidly to particular dialogue or particular actions. Depends on who you're working with. But even with that in mind, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't necessarily consider the words that you're using in each panel. So I know that for me, I have edited a script as I've worked out the pages. There may be some words that I add if I feel a bit more clarity is needed, and there may be some words that I just leave out completely because the image says the words a lot better. Sometimes you have to let the words do most of the storytelling with the images providing the context, and sometimes it's the other way around. The more you create comics, the better you're going to be at harmonizing the elements of word and image into one cohesive story. Now, the choice of flow is determined by everything that we've covered in this video. It's the unwritten contract between the reader and the creator to ensure that they read the comic in a way that you intend it to be read. So a common example of this, particularly in Western comics, is that you assume that most people will read from left to right and up to down. In other cultures, like for Japanese comics or manga, it's right to left. Knowing which direction your audience will read your comic is going to be very helpful when laying out the panels. There is one way that will pretty much guarantee that your reader will read the comic page in the order that you want, from left to right, up to down, and that is by having a page with 9 panels, so 3 sets of 3. And they all go from left to right, left to right, left to right. But it's not necessarily the most interesting or creative way to create a comic book, although it can totally be done that way, and it's perfectly valid to do that. So if you want to create some funky panels or have your characters or objects break through the barriers of the panel or do whatever you want, you need to handle that with care. Creating a page with weird panels and not necessarily a clear panel hierarchy can cause confusion with the reader, and they may not know which panel leads from one to another. And so you need to make sure that the reader knows where to read next. And you can do this through images or words or both. For example, the shape of an object can lead the audience eye from one panel to the next. Likewise, you can be a bit more literal and have a character point to the next panel, or you can have an image in the background that points to the direction that you want them to read in. In addition to that, you could have the word balloons overlap from one panel slightly into the next panel so that the reader continues to read from one side to the other. And all these things can be combined so that the reader knows where to go. But no matter what choice you make, just make sure you have the reader in mind. And they are the basic choices when it comes to creating your panels for your comic book. I thoroughly recommend getting Scott McCloud's Making Comics book because it's a great guide in making comics, and it's what this entire series is going to be based on because it's very, very helpful, very, very good. Link to it is in the description. I've been Brinkley, have fun drawing, and I'll see you in the next one.